Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep into the world of critical mineral recycling.
Ah, yes. This is a fascinating topic.
It is, and we're really lucky to have you here to guide us through this IEA report on recycling. This report is packed with information.
Yeah, it is a hefty one, but it's really important. These critical minerals, they're the building blocks of the clean energy transition.
Absolutely. We're talking about things like lithium for batteries, cobalt, nickel. All these materials are essential for electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines, the whole shebang.
Exactly. And as the demand for these technologies skyrockets, so does the demand for these minerals. Which brings us to the heart of the matter, recycling.
Right, we can't just keep digging up the earth for more and more of these minerals. It's not sustainable. And that's where this report comes in. The IEA is making a strong case for why recycling is not just good for the environment, but also crucial for national security and for building more resilient supply chains.
It's like having a backup plan, right? Instead of relying solely on mining, we can tap into the resources we already have right here in our own backyards.
Speaking of backyards, did you know that in 2022, electronic waste, like old phones and laptops, contained an estimated $90 billion worth of metals?
Wow, that's a staggering number.
It is. But here's the kicker. We only recovered about $28 billion worth of those metals through recycling.
So we're basically throwing away a fortune every year.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it? The IEA calls this urban mining, and it's a huge missed opportunity. Our cities are like untapped mines, brimming with valuable resources.
Yeah. It's about shifting our perspective, seeing waste not as something to discard, but as a potential source of valuable materials.
How do we unlock this urban mine? How does the recycling process actually work?
Well, there are several different methods, and some of them are surprisingly high-tech. You've got your more traditional methods like pyrometallurgy.
Pyrometallurgy. That sounds intense.
It is. It basically involves using extremely high heat to extract metals from things like e-waste or batteries. Think of it like a controlled melting process.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. What about other methods?
Well, there's hydrometallurgy, which is kind of the opposite of pyrometallurgy. Instead of heat, it uses chemical solutions to separate and extract the valuable metals. It's more like a precise chemical separation process.
So it's like a chemical detective, carefully isolating the elements we need.
That's a great way to put it. And then you have some really cutting-edge technologies emerging, like direct recycling.
Direct recycling. I haven't heard of that one.
It's still relatively new, but it holds a lot of promise, especially for battery recycling. Basically, instead of completely dismantling the battery, direct recycling focuses on refreshing the core part of the battery, retaining its structure and value.
So it's like giving an old battery a new lease on life.
Exactly. And it's potentially much less energy-intensive than traditional battery recycling methods.
That's fascinating. It sounds like we're on the cusp of a real recycling revolution. But I'm curious, the report also mentions some challenges, like the shift towards lithium iron phosphate, or LFP, batteries in electric vehicles. How does that impact recycling?
Ah, yes, LFP batteries. They're great. In a lot of ways, they're safer, more stable, longer lasting. But they also pose a challenge for recyclers.
How so?
Well, the materials in LFP batteries, particularly the lithium and iron, are simply less valuable than the materials in other types of batteries. So it can be harder for recyclers to make a profit from recovering those materials.
So it's an economic challenge, essentially.
Precisely. It's about finding ways to incentivize LFP battery recycling, even if the material value alone isn't there.
And what are some of the solutions the report proposes?
Well, one interesting idea is what they call toll-based recycling models.
Coal-based, that sounds intriguing.
Yeah, basically, instead of recyclers buying batteries and profiting from the sale of recovered materials, they would charge a fee for processing the batteries, like a service charge.
So it's more like a waste management service than a traditional recycling business.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from material value to the service of responsible recycling.
That's a really interesting approach. It seems like the IEA is saying sometimes we need to look beyond pure profit and consider the bigger picture of responsible resource management.
Absolutely. The report makes a very strong argument for policies that ensure these valuable materials don't end up in landfills.
And speaking of the bigger picture, the report paints a fascinating picture of the global landscape of battery recycling. And one thing that really jumped out at me was China's dominance in this field.
It is quite remarkable. China currently controls about 80% of the global capacity for battery recycling.
80%. That's a huge chunk of the market.
It is. And the IEA projects that China's dominance is only going to grow in the coming years.
So it sounds like China is really ahead of the curve on this. What about other regions?
Well, other regions like the US and Europe are starting to ramp up their recycling efforts, but they have a lot of catching up to do.
It's like a global race for recycling dominance is underway.
In a way, it is. And it's not just about competition. It's about ensuring that we have enough recycling capacity globally to handle the growing influx of end-of-life batteries.
The report also raises the fascinating question of what happens when used electric vehicles start getting exported to developing economies.
Yes, the flow of used EVs. That's a critical point. We've seen this pattern before with conventional cars. Used vehicles often end up in developing countries, which can create both challenges and opportunities.
What kind of challenges are we talking about?
Well, one concern is that developing countries might not have the infrastructure or regulations in place to handle the influx of used EV batteries.
So you could end up with these batteries being improperly disposed of, or even ending up in landfills, which would be a huge environmental problem.
Exactly. And that's why the report emphasizes the need for capacity building and knowledge transfer to help developing countries develop their own sustainable recycling industries.
It sounds like this could be a real opportunity for developing countries to become key players in the global battery recycling market.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that the circular economy is not just a developed world concept, it's a global opportunity for economic development, job creation, and environmental protection.
So we've covered a lot of ground already, but let's zoom in on one specific material that the report highlights as being crucial for the clean energy transition. Copper.
Yes, copper, the unsung hero of the clean energy revolution.
It's easy to forget about copper when we're talking about all these fancy new technologies, but it's everywhere in EVs, batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, you name it.
And the IEA is sounding the alarm about a potential copper supply deficit in the coming years.
Really? That's a bit concerning.
It is. They're predicting that by 2035, new copper mines will only meet about 70% of global demand.
That's a huge gap. So where's the other 30% going to come from?
Well, that's where recycling comes in. The IEA sees recycling as a critical piece of the solution to this looming copper shortage.
That makes sense. Copper is one of those materials that can be recycled over and over again without losing its quality. It's like the gift that keeps on giving.
Exactly. But the report also notes that the amount of copper coming from recycled sources has actually stagnated in recent years.
Why is that?
Well, it's a complex mix of factors. Fluctuating copper prices, trade restrictions, and slow implementation of policies designed to boost scrap collection have all contributed to this stagnation.
So there's a lot of untapped potential in copper recycling.
A huge amount. The report predicts that a massive wave of end-of-life scrap from things like EVs and wind turbines will soon become available, which could reverse this trend and create a real boom in copper recycling.
So it's like we're on the verge of a copper recycling renaissance.
The potential is certainly there, but the report emphasizes that we need the right policies in place to unlock that potential. Things like higher collection rates, improved sorting systems, investments in new smelters, and even potential mandates for recycling in certain sectors.
It's a good reminder that market forces alone aren't always enough to drive responsible recycling practices. We need proactive policies that incentivize and support the industry.
Absolutely. And it's not just about copper. Remember that $90 billion worth of metals we talked about earlier, lost in e-waste every year?
It's a staggering amount.
It is. And that e-waste contains a vast amount of critical minerals that could be recovered and reused. It's like having a treasure chest hidden in plain sight.
But the report is pretty blunt about the fact that we're not doing a good enough job of capturing those materials.
You're right. Global e-waste generation has been rising much faster than our collection and recycling efforts.
So what needs to change?
Well, the report suggests a number of solutions. Stricter regulations against illegal dumping, improved sorting techniques using robotics and laser analysis. And they point to some innovative business models like Apple's closed-loop system, where they're designing their products for recyclability and taking responsibility for the entire life cycle of their devices.
It sounds like a multi-pronged approach is needed, with governments setting the stage and companies taking responsibility for their products.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the role consumers play in this. Making conscious choices about how we dispose of our electronics can make a real difference.
Every little bit helps, right? Now, one of the most surprising ideas the report explores is the potential to recover critical minerals from mine waste.
Yes, remining old mine waste. It might seem counterintuitive at first glance.
It does. I mean, why bother with old waste when we can just mine new ore?
That's a common assumption. But as the quality of ore in many mines declines, and as the demand for critical minerals continues to rise, remining waste becomes a much more appealing option.
So it's about turning what was once considered a liability into a valuable resource.
Exactly. And the IEA report argues that there are multiple factors that can make remining economically viable.
Like what?
Well, rising metal prices, for one,
Yeah.
and government incentives can also play a role, encouraging companies to invest in remining projects.
What about the environmental benefits? Is remining good for the environment?
It can be. Reprocessing mine waste can significantly reduce the environmental footprint of mining. It can help prevent water contamination, reduce safety risks, and even remediate pollution from old mine sites.
So it's a win-win. We recover valuable resources while also cleaning up the environment.
Precisely. It's a great example of how thinking outside the box can lead to both economic and environmental benefits.
Okay, so we've explored all these different sources of critical minerals, but let's talk about the bottom line. What makes recycling ventures actually profitable? The IEA report gets into the nitty-gritty of recycling economics, and it's not always a simple equation.
It's definitely more nuanced than just saying recycling is good for the environment, therefore it must be profitable. The reality is that a lot of factors influence the economics of recycling.
So what are some of those factors?
Well, material prices are a huge driver. When the prices of critical minerals are high, recycling becomes more attractive because the recovered materials are worth more. But as we've seen with lithium, for example, those prices can be very volatile, which makes it risky for businesses.
So it's a gamble for recyclers.
In some ways, yes. The IEA report emphasizes how market-based recycling, where profits depend on selling the recovered materials, is particularly vulnerable to those price swings. They suggest that things like long-term contracts and revenue-sharing models could help create more stability and predictability for recyclers.
So it's about finding ways to mitigate those risks.
Exactly. And the report also highlights the importance of government policies in supporting recycling economics. Things like extended producer responsibility schemes, recycled content mandates, and tax breaks for recycling can create a more favorable environment for businesses to invest in these ventures.
So it sounds like a combination of market forces and government policies is needed to make recycling truly viable. But what about technology? What role does technology play in all of this?
Technology is absolutely crucial. The report highlights some really exciting advancements in recycling technology that are making the whole process more efficient, more environmentally friendly, and more economically viable.
Give us some examples.
Well, one area where we're seeing a lot of innovation is in sorting technologies. They're developing robotic systems that can identify and separate different types of materials with incredible accuracy. And they're using things like laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy to analyze material composition in real time.
It's amazing how technology is transforming the recycling industry. But it's important to remember that recycling isn't just a technical endeavor. The report also addresses the potential environmental and social concerns associated with recycling.
You're absolutely right. If recycling isn't managed responsibly, it can have negative impacts. The report raises concerns about things like pollution from waste residues, water contamination, and harmful emissions if facilities aren't operated to high standards.
So it's not just about recycling, it's about recycling responsibly.
Exactly. And the report also points to issues like child labor and unsafe working conditions in some parts of the world, particularly in the informal recycling sector.
It's a reminder that we need to be vigilant about ensuring that recycling is done ethically and sustainably.
Absolutely. The report stresses the importance of things like rigorous safety protocols, responsible sourcing of materials, and comprehensive regulations that cover every step of the recycling process.
And they also emphasize the importance of traceability, standards, and certifications in promoting responsible recycling practices.
Right. Traceability systems can help ensure that recycled materials are coming from reputable sources and have been processed responsibly. And things like international standards and third-party certifications provide a framework for best practices and help build consumer trust in recycled products.
It's about creating a more transparent and accountable recycling industry. But the report goes beyond just focusing on recycling. It encourages us to think more broadly about the entire life cycle of products and embrace what they call a circular economy.
Ah, yes, the circular economy. It's a really powerful concept. It's about moving beyond just dealing with waste at the end of a product's life. It's about designing products from the very beginning with circularity in mind, thinking about how to maximize resource efficiency, minimize waste, and create closed-loop systems where materials are constantly being reused and repurposed.
It's about shifting from a linear take, make, dispose model to a circular model where resources are constantly flowing back into the economy.
Exactly. It's a complete paradigm shift in how we think about products and resources.
What are some of the key strategies the report highlights for moving towards a circular economy?
Well, one key strategy is what they call circular design. This means designing products to last longer, be easily repaired, and ultimately be recycled more efficiently.
So it's about moving away from the disposable culture we've become so accustomed to.
Exactly. It's about designing for durability, repairability, and recyclability.
What about reuse and repurposing?
The report also emphasizes the importance of those strategies. Extending the lifespan of products through repair and refurbishment can significantly reduce the demand for new materials. And finding creative ways to repurpose old products for new applications can keep those materials in circulation even longer.
It's about maximizing the value we extract from the resources we already have.
Precisely.
Mm.
The report argues that this shift toward a circular economy is not just about environmental sustainability, it's also about economic resilience, long-term prosperity, and creating a system that works for both people and the planet.
It's about recognizing that our current linear economic model is simply not sustainable in the long run. We need to find a better way, and the circular economy offers a compelling vision for that future.
It's a future where waste is minimized, resources are valued, and economic growth is decoupled from environmental degradation.
That's a future I think we can all get behind. But before we move on to the IEA's specific policy recommendations, I want to pause for a moment and ask you, our listeners, a question. As we transition to a cleaner energy future, what role do you envision playing in supporting the growth of a responsible and sustainable critical mineral recycling industry?
It's a question worth reflecting on. It's not just about what governments and businesses do, it's about what we do as individuals, as consumers, as citizens. It's a big question for sure, but I think it's an important one for all of us to consider.
Absolutely. The transition to a circular economy won't happen overnight, and it's not going to be easy.
You're right. It's going to require a collective effort from governments, businesses, and individuals.
And speaking of governments, the IEA report actually dives into some very specific policy recommendations for governments looking to accelerate the growth of the critical mineral recycling industry. One of the key recommendations is for governments to develop detailed long-term policy roadmaps.
Long-term vision is essential, isn't it?
It is. And the IEA is essentially saying to governments, look, if you want to see a thriving recycling industry, you need to give businesses a clear signal that you're committed to this for the long haul.
It's about creating a sense of stability and predictability, right? So businesses can confidently invest in recycling infrastructure and technology, knowing that the rules of the game aren't going to change every few years.
Exactly. Investors need to know what the playing field looks like before they commit their resources. And a long-term roadmap with clear targets, timelines, and support mechanisms can provide that much-needed certainty.
It's like giving investors a map to navigate the uncharted territory of the circular economy.
That's a great analogy. The report also emphasizes the importance of harmonized waste management and recycling policies. Now, why is harmonization so crucial? Wouldn't it be easier to just let each country figure out its own approach to recycling?
Well, it might seem simpler on the surface, but think about what could happen if we don't have harmonized policies. You could end up with a situation where different countries have vastly different regulations, creating loopholes that allow companies to exploit those differences.
You mean like companies shipping their waste to countries with weaker environmental standards or lower labor costs?
Exactly. That's what we call a race to the bottom, where companies are essentially shopping around for the cheapest and least regulated option, regardless of the environmental or social consequences.
So harmonized policies are about preventing that race at the bottom and ensuring that recycling is done responsibly, regardless of where it happens.
Precisely. It's about creating a level playing field where everyone is competing on a fair and sustainable basis. And harmonized policies also help to develop more efficient secondary markets for recycled materials, which benefits both recyclers and manufacturers.
So it's about creating a more robust and stable global ecosystem for recycling. Now, another key recommendation from the IEA is for governments to actively promote the development of collection and take-back infrastructure. Why is this infrastructure so important?
Well, imagine you have all these fantastic recycling facilities, all this cutting-edge technology, but you can't get the materials to them efficiently. The whole system breaks down, doesn't it?
So it's like having a state-of-the-art kitchen, but no way to get the groceries from the store to the pantry.
That's a great analogy. We need a seamless pipeline from end-of-life products to those recycling plants, and that's where collection and take-back infrastructure comes in.
So it's about building the logistical backbone of the circular economy. The roads, the bridges, the collection points, the transportation systems that make it all work.
Exactly. And the IEA suggests a variety of policies to achieve this, including extended producer responsibility schemes, where manufacturers are responsible for the end-of-life management of their products. They also recommend public awareness campaigns to educate consumers about the importance of proper disposal and even financial incentives for returning used products.
It's about making it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing and participate in the recycling process. But convenience alone isn't always enough. We also need to ensure that the entire process is transparent and accountable. And that brings us to another key aspect of the IEA's recommendations: traceability.
Traceability is absolutely crucial in the recycling industry. It allows us to follow materials throughout the entire recycling process, from the moment they're collected to the final recycled product. This helps ensure that recycled materials are coming from legitimate sources, are processed responsibly, and meet the required quality standards.
It's like having a chain of custody for those materials.
Exactly. And it helps build trust in the recycling industry. Consumers are much more likely to buy products made with recycled materials if they know those materials were sourced and processed ethically and responsibly.
It's about creating a virtuous cycle where transparency leads to trust, which in turn drives demand for recycled products.
Exactly. And the benefits of traceability go beyond just ensuring responsible practices. It can also help recyclers and manufacturers. For recyclers, traceability is a way to showcase their commitment to sustainability and quality, which can give them a competitive advantage. And for manufacturers, traceability allows them to verify the origin and quality of their materials, demonstrating their commitment to a circular economy.
So it's a win-win for everyone involved, for the environment, for consumers, for businesses.
Absolutely. And the IEA believes that governments have a role to play in promoting traceability as well. They recommend policies that encourage or even mandate the use of traceability systems in specific sectors, along with financial incentives for companies that adopt these systems.
It's about using those policy levers to reward responsible practices and make traceability the norm rather than the exception.
Mm.
But let's be realistic, technology plays a huge role in making all of this possible. What does the IEA say about that?
They're very bullish on the role of technology in driving progress in the recycling industry. They highlight several areas where we're seeing incredible innovation, like advanced sorting technologies using robotics and artificial intelligence.
We touched on those earlier, but it's worth emphasizing just how transformative those technologies can be. I mean, imagine robots that can identify and sort different types of plastics or metals with incredible speed and accuracy. It's mind-blowing.
It is. And it's not just about robotics. They're also developing new sensors and analytical techniques that can determine the composition of materials in real time, allowing for much more precise and efficient sorting.
So it's about combining those advanced sorting technologies with sophisticated analytical tools to create a truly intelligent recycling system.
Exactly. And then you have even more futuristic technologies emerging, like biometallurgy, which uses microorganisms to extract metals from waste.
We talked about that earlier, and it still sounds like something straight out of a science fiction novel.
It does, doesn't it? But it's
True.
a real thing, and it has the potential to revolutionize how we recover metals from things like e-waste and mine tailings.
It's like harnessing the power of nature to solve our waste problems.
Exactly. And then you have advancements in hydrometallurgical processes, making them more efficient and effective at recovering a wider range of metals from those complex materials.
It's all about pushing the boundaries of what's possible in recycling, turning what was once considered waste into valuable resources. But as the recycling industry evolves and becomes more technologically sophisticated, it's also important to ensure that we have a workforce that can keep pace with these advancements.
That's a crucial point. We need skilled workers who can operate those advanced facilities, maintain that sophisticated equipment, and manage those increasingly complex processes.
So it's not just about investing in the technologies, it's about investing in the people who will make those technologies work.
Absolutely. And the report highlights that workforce development in the recycling sector can create good-paying jobs and economic opportunities, particularly in communities that have been traditionally reliant on extractive industries, like mining.
So it's about creating a just transition, one that offers new opportunities for workers in those communities as we shift to a more circular economy. But ultimately, a lot of this comes down to the role of business.
Businesses have a huge responsibility, don't they? They're the ones who are developing new technologies, implementing new processes, and ultimately making decisions about how products are designed and managed throughout their life cycle.
Exactly. And the IEA report strongly encourages businesses to adopt a circular economy mindset, focusing on things like maximizing resource efficiency, minimizing waste, and creating closed-loop systems where materials are constantly flowing back into the economy.
It's about shifting from a linear take, make, dispose model to a circular model where products are designed for durability, repairability, and recyclability.
And it's not just about environmental responsibility. It's also about recognizing that sustainability can be a real driver of innovation and competitiveness.
Absolutely. Companies that embrace circular economy principles often find that they're able to reduce their costs, improve their efficiency, and differentiate themselves in the marketplace.
It's about recognizing that sustainability isn't just good for the planet, it can also be good for business. And the report highlights some inspiring examples of companies that are really leading the way in the circular economy.
Companies like Patagonia, for example, with their commitment to repairing and recycling their products. And Interface, the flooring company, which has completely transformed its business model to embrace circularity.
Those are great examples.
hmm
But the IEA also emphasizes the need for collaboration. It's not just about individual companies going it alone. It's about working together to create a more sustainable system.
Collaboration is essential. It's about bringing together businesses, governments, researchers, and civil society organizations to share knowledge, develop new technologies, and overcome barriers to a circular economy.
The report highlights the importance of initiatives like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which has been a real driving force behind the circular economy movement, bringing together businesses, policymakers, and thought leaders to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable future.
It's a great example of how collective action can make a real difference. And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in this transition.
So we've talked about the role of governments, the role of businesses, the power of technology, and the importance of collaboration. But the IEA report also reminds us that the transition to a circular economy is not just a technical or economic challenge, it's also a social and political challenge.
It requires us to rethink our values, our consumption patterns, and our relationship with the natural world.
It's about recognizing that our current linear economic model, based on endless growth and consumption, is simply not sustainable. We need a new paradigm, one that is grounded in the principles of circularity, sustainability, and equity.
It's about creating a future where economic prosperity is not at odds with environmental health and social well-being.
It's about building a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable world for ourselves and for generations to come. It really is a profound shift in thinking, isn't it? Moving away from this idea of disposability and embracing the idea of circularity.
It is. It's a big change. But the more I learn about the circular economy, the more convinced I am that it's the only way forward.
I agree, and I think the IEA report does a fantastic job of laying out the case for why this transition is so important and why it's ultimately in all of our best interests.
Absolutely. It's not just an environmental issue. It's an economic issue, a social issue, a security issue. It really touches on every aspect of our lives.
And that brings us back to the question we posed earlier to our listeners. What role do you envision playing in supporting the growth of a responsible and sustainable critical mineral recycling industry?
It's a big question, but I think it's one that we each need to grapple with. Because the transition to a circular economy is not going to happen without individual action.
It's not just about governments and businesses making changes. It's about each of us making different choices in our own lives.
Exactly. And those choices can take many forms. Some people might be drawn to activism, advocating for stronger environmental policies, or putting pressure on companies to adopt more sustainable practices.
Others might be inspired to innovate, to develop new technologies or business models that advance the circular economy.
And some might focus on making more conscious choices as consumers, supporting businesses that align with their values, and reducing their own environmental footprint.
There's no one right answer. The important thing is that we're all moving in the same direction, working towards a shared vision of a more sustainable future.
And I think that's what's so exciting about the circular economy. It's not just about solving problems, it's about creating something new, something better.
It's about building a future where economic prosperity is not at odds with environmental health and social well-being.
It's about creating a world where waste is not seen as waste, but as a valuable resource.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things and understanding that the choices we make today will have a ripple effect on generations to come.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, haven't we?
We have, from the intricacies of recycling processes to the economic forces at play, to the mind-boggling technological innovations and the crucial environmental and social considerations.
It's been quite a journey.
It has, and I hope our listeners have found it as fascinating and thought-provoking as we have.
I think this IEA report is a real wake-up call. It's a reminder that we're at a critical juncture, and the choices we make now will determine the course of our future.
It's a call to action for all of us, governments, businesses, and individuals, to embrace the principles of circularity, sustainability, and equity, and to work together to create a world that is both prosperous and sustainable.
A world where resources are valued, waste is minimized, and economic growth is decoupled from environmental degradation.
That's the vision we need to strive for, and that's the message we want to leave you with today.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of critical mineral recycling and the circular economy.
We hope you'll continue to explore this topic and to consider the role you can play in shaping a more sustainable future.
Until next time, this is The Deep Dive, signing off.